The old apartment building stood between two tall modern offices, forgotten by time and everyone who worked around it. People said it had been built before the war, but no one seemed to know exactly when or by whom. When the city lights flickered on at night, the building looked different. Its windows dark, its balconies leaning like old bones. Some claimed they had sometimes seen a shadow standing on the fourth-floor balcony, even though that floor had been empty for years. Jonas, a new journalist in the city, didn't believe in rumors. He was looking for a cheap place, and the landlord offered him room 407 for almost nothing. The elevator stops working after midnight, the old landlord said quietly, so just use the stairs. Jonas laughed it off and moved in the same day. The apartment smelled of dust and something faintly metallic, like old coins. At night, the pipes groaned inside the walls, but that was normal for old buildings. The first strange thing happened at 2:17 a.m. Jonas woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging, back and forth in front of his door. He opened it. The hallway was empty. The flickering ceiling light hummed softly. The second night, the footsteps returned. This time, they stopped directly outside his door. Then 3 slow knocks echoed through the wood. Jonas checked the hallway again. No one. But at the end of the corridor, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A door. Painted the same color as the wall. Marked 408. The landlord had told him his was the last apartment on the floor. The next morning, Jonas asked about it. The landlord's face went pale. "There is no 408, he whispered. That night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the knocking returned. But this time, it came from inside Jonas's apartment door. The knocking came again. 3 slow knocks from the inside of the door. Jonas froze in bed, staring at the dark outline of the apartment. The digital clock beside him still glowed 2:17 a.m. He held his breath. Another knock echoed softly through the wood, as if someone stood in the hallway and yet somehow inside the apartment at the same time. Jonas forced himself up. The wooden floor creaked under his feet as he approached the door. The hallway light leaked faintly through the crack beneath it. For several seconds he stood there, hand hovering over the handle. Then he opened it. The hallway was empty, long, silent. The flickering bulb hummed above. But something was wrong. The air felt colder than before, and at the far end of the corridor the wall looked different. Jonas squinted. The outline of the hidden door was clearer now. Apartment 408. The number looked scratched into the paint, as if someone had carved it with a knife. Jonas stepped into the hallway. His footsteps echoed softly as he walked toward the door. The closer he got, the more the air seemed to thicken. By the time he stood in front of it, he felt a strange pressure in his chest. The handle was old brass, cold. He touched it. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, something moved behind the door. A soft, dragging sound, like bare feet sliding slowly across the floor. Jonas jerked his hand back. He told himself it was just another tenant. Maybe the landlord lied about the apartment being empty. Maybe someone moved in recently. Still, the sound of dragging footsteps continued for a few seconds before stopping abruptly. Jonas stepped back toward his own apartment. Just as he reached his door, a faint whisper drifted through the hallway. It sounded like a voice speaking through water. Jonas. His heart slammed against his ribs. He turned slowly toward apartment 408. The whisper came again. Jonas. Open. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, the hallway looked normal again. In daylight, the wall at the end of the corridor appeared completely flat. No door, no number. Jonas stood there for a long time, running his hand across the paint. Smooth plaster, nothing else. When he told the landlord what happened, the old man refused to look at him. "You heard knocking?" he asked quietly. Jonas nodded. The landlord sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Then it knows your name now." Jonas laughed nervously. "What does?" The landlord didn't answer. Instead, he muttered something under his breath and walked away. That night, Jonas tried to stay awake. He made coffee and sat at his desk pretending to work. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock. The building remained silent except for the groaning pipes in the walls. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the power went out. The entire apartment plunged into darkness. The clock died, the refrigerator stopped humming, and from the hallway came the sound again. Dragging footsteps. Slowly approaching his door. Jonas felt his throat tighten. The steps stopped outside. 3 knocks. Slow. Hollow. Jonas didn't move. The knocking came again, then the whisper returned. "Jonas, please." The voice sounded closer now, almost against the door. Trembling, Jonas grabbed the flashlight from his phone and stepped into the hallway. The beam cut through the darkness, and there it was. The door to apartment 408 stood clearly at the end of the corridor, but this time it was open, just a few inches. Darkness pooled inside the room like thick smoke. Something shifted in the shadows. Jonas took a step closer. The whisper floated out again. "You opened first." Suddenly, the hallway light flickered back on. Jonas flinched. The door to 408 slammed shut. The number vanished instantly, leaving only blank wall behind. Jonas stumbled back toward his apartment. His hands were shaking violently now. The next day, he searched the building's records at the city library. The apartment complex had been built in 1924. For decades, it housed factory workers and their families. But something strange appeared in the old documents. In 1977, the building lost one of its tenants. A woman named Marta Keller disappeared from apartment 407. No body was ever found. The apartment had been sealed for years afterward. Jonas stared at the record. He was living in 407. That night, he returned home with a growing sense of dread. The hallway felt longer than before. The lights flickered again. And as he passed the far wall, he noticed something new. A faint handprint pressed into the paint, as if someone inside the wall had pushed outward. Jonas backed away slowly. Then he heard it. Scratching. From inside the wall. A long, dragging scrape. Moving toward his apartment. He rushed inside and slammed the door. The scratching continued. Slow. Patient. It stopped directly beside his bed. For several minutes there was silence. Then 3 soft knocks came from the wall itself. Jonas pressed his ear against the plaster. Something whispered from the other side. "You opened first." The temperature in the room dropped sharply. The wall bulged slightly inward. A crack spread across the paint like a spider web. and from inside that crack, a pale finger slowly pushed through. Jonas screamed and stumbled back. The finger twitched as if testing the air. Then another finger emerged, and another. Soon, an entire hand forced its way through the wall, skin gray and stretched tight across the bones. Jonas grabbed a chair and smashed it against the plaster. The wall broke open with a thunderous crack. Behind it was not brick or insulation. It was a dark, empty room. Apartment 408, the same room that only appeared at night. Inside the darkness stood a figure, thin, motionless, watching him. Its face was completely blank except for a wide, smiling mouth, and when it spoke, it used Jonas's own voice. "Now you live here too." The hallway lights flickered violently. Jonas tried to run toward the door, but the apartment seemed to stretch longer with every step. The doorway moved farther away. Behind him, the figure from 408 stepped slowly into the room. Its feet dragged across the floor exactly like the footsteps he had heard every night. Drag, step, drag, step. Jonas finally reached the door and yanked it open. The hallway beyond looked wrong. The walls were older, the paint peeled. The lights hung broken from the ceiling. It looked like the building decades ago. And every apartment door along the hallway was open. Inside, each one stood a motionless figure. Watching him, waiting. At the far end of the corridor stood the landlord, but he looked younger and terrified. "You shouldn't have answered the knocking," the landlord whispered. The dragging footsteps came closer behind Jonas. "It needed someone new," the landlord said. "Someone in 407. The lights burst. The hallway plunged into darkness again. And somewhere in that darkness, 3 slow knocks echoed through the building. Jonas stood frozen in the darkness. The hallway smelled damp, like mold and old wood that had been sealed away for decades. Somewhere behind him, the dragging footsteps continued. Drag, step, drag, step. The sound echoed slowly through the corridor, growing closer. The landlord's younger face looked pale in the faint light leaking from a broken fixture on the ceiling. "Don't move," he whispered. Jonas tried to speak, but his throat felt dry and tight. What is that thing?" he asked quietly. The landlord shook his head slowly. "It wasn't always like this." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the building fell completely silent. Jonas felt a cold breath brush against the back of his neck. Then the whisper returned, soft and stretched, like someone speaking through a cracked speaker. "Jonas, stay." Jonas turned. The hallway behind him was empty again. Apartment 407 stood open. Inside, the room looked darker than before, as if the shadows inside had thickened. "You have to leave the floor," the landlord said urgently. "If it reaches you again, you won't come back." Jonas didn't hesitate. He ran. His shoes pounded against the wooden floor as he rushed down the hallway toward the staircase. The open apartment doors blurred past him. Inside each one, the silent figures remained perfectly still, their heads slowly turning to follow him as he passed. Some looked like ordinary people. Others looked wrong, faces too pale, eyes too wide, mouths frozen open as if mid-scream. Jonas reached the stairwell and pushed the heavy door open. The staircase spiraled downward into darkness. The lights here were dead. Only the faint glow from the hallway illuminated the first few steps. "Keep going," the landlord whispered behind him. "Don't stop." Jonas began descending. His footsteps echoed through the stairwell. One floor, then another. But something was wrong. The stairwell felt deeper than it should have been. The building only had 6 floors. Yet Jonas kept running down steps that never seemed to end. After several minutes, he stopped, breathing heavily. The darkness below him remained endless. Slowly, he looked up. The landlord was gone. The door to the 4th floor had vanished. Only a blank concrete wall remained where it should have been. Then the dragging sound returned. Above him, drag, step, drag, step. Something was coming down the stairs. Jonas's heart pounded wildly. He rushed downward again, taking the steps 2 at a time. The footsteps followed him, never rushing, never stopping, just slowly descending behind him. Finally, Jonas saw a faint light below. The lobby. Relief flooded through him as he burst through the stairwell door. But the lobby looked wrong. The furniture was old. The wallpaper was yellowed and peeling. The front desk looked decades older than the one he had seen earlier that day. Behind the desk sat a man reading a newspaper. The man slowly lowered it. Jonas froze. It was the landlord again, but this version looked even younger, maybe 30 years old. The man stared at him with confusion. "Can I help you?" Jonas struggled to breathe. "What year is it?" he asked. The landlord frowned. 1977. Jonas felt the blood drain from his face. That was the year Marta Keller disappeared. Behind him, the stairwell door creaked open slowly. Drag, step, drag, step. The landlord looked toward the sound. "Who's there?" he asked. A long gray hand appeared around the edge of the stairwell door. The landlord's expression changed instantly to horror. "No," he whispered, "not again." Jonas grabbed the front door and pulled it open. Cold night air rushed inside. Outside, the city looked different. The buildings were older, the streetlights dimmer. Cars from another era lined the road. Jonas ran into the street. The apartment building towered behind him, its windows dark except for one. 4th floor. Apartment 407. A shadow stood inside the window watching him. Then the shape slowly lifted its arm and knocked against the glass. 3 slow taps echoed faintly through the night. Jonas stumbled backward. The front door of the building slammed shut behind him. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the window of apartment 407 opened slowly. A pale face leaned out. It looked exactly like Jonas. The copy of him smiled widely into the street, and from inside the building, the knocking began again. Jonas stared at the window, his mind struggling to accept what he was seeing. The face looking down at him from apartment 407 was his own. Same eyes, same hair, same terrified expression, except for the smile. The thing in the window smiled far wider than any human could. Its lips stretched unnaturally across its face as it lifted its hand and knocked against the glass again. Tap, 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 3 slow knocks. The sound echoed through the quiet street. Jonas stumbled backward until he nearly fell into the road. "No," he whispered. The figure in the window tilted its head as if studying him. Then it slowly stepped back into the darkness of the apartment. The window shut. The building returned to complete silence. For several minutes, Jonas simply stood there breathing heavily. The city around him looked wrong. The street lamps were dim yellow bulbs instead of the bright white lights he remembered. The cars parked along the curb were old models with wide chrome bumpers. Even the storefront signs looked decades out of date. He had somehow stepped into the past. Into the same year, the woman from apartment 407 disappeared. 1977. Jonas looked back at the apartment building. The structure seemed heavier somehow, as if time itself pressed down on its walls. Every window looked dark now, every balcony empty, but he could still feel it watching him. Suddenly, a voice spoke behind him. "You saw it too." Jonas spun around. A woman stood near the sidewalk under a street lamp. She looked pale and exhausted, her dark hair hanging loosely around her shoulders. Her clothes looked old-fashioned. Wide collar, long coat. For a moment, Jonas didn't recognize her. Then he remembered the photograph from the city records. Marta Keller, the missing tenant. Jonas stopped himself. Marta looked at the building with hollow eyes. "I know that look," she said quietly. "It's the same one I had when I first saw it wearing my face." Jonas felt a chill run through him. "It copied you too?" Marta nodded slowly. "That thing in the building doesn't just haunt the apartments. It replaces people." Jonas swallowed. "How?" Marta pointed toward the fourth-floor window. "It waits for someone to answer the knocking." The wind rustled softly through the empty street. Jonas thought about the first night in his apartment. The 3 knocks on the door. The whisper calling his name. "Once you respond," Marta continued, "it learns who you are." "And then?" Jonas asked. Marta looked directly at him. "Then it takes your place." Jonas felt his stomach drop. "But you're still here." Marta shook her head slowly. "Not really." She lifted her sleeve. Her arm looked strangely faded in the lamplight, almost translucent around the edges. "I never left the building," she whispered. "None of us did." Jonas suddenly noticed something horrifying. The street was too quiet. There were no people, no moving cars, no sounds of a living city. It was as if the world outside the apartment building had been drained of life. "This isn't the real city, is it?" Jonas asked. Marta shook her head again. "It's the building's memory." Jonas turned back toward the apartment. The fourth-floor light flickered on again. The silhouette of his double appeared in the window. But now it wasn't alone. Other shapes stood behind it. Dozens of them. Faces pressed against the glass. Some looked terrified, others completely empty. "Those are the ones it replaced," Marta said quietly. "Every person who lived there." Jonas stepped backward slowly. "Then how do we stop it?" Marta's eyes darkened. "You can't stop it." She pointed toward the entrance of the building. The front door had opened again by itself. The lobby beyond was dark. But there might be a way to escape. Jonas looked at the door, then back at her. "You want me to go back inside?" Marta nodded. "The thing that replaces us lives in apartment 408. The room that shouldn't exist." Jonas felt his heart pound again. If you destroy that room, the building might release us. A long silence followed. The wind blew colder through the street. From the fourth floor came a faint sound, drag, step, drag, step. The thing wearing Jonas's face had started moving again, and it was heading toward the stairs. Marta looked at him urgently. "You don't have much time. Once it reaches the street..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jonas took a deep breath and looked at the open door of the apartment building. The darkness inside seemed deeper than before. Waiting. Behind him, somewhere inside the stairwell, the dragging footsteps had begun descending again. Drag, step, drag, step. Jonas clenched his fists. Then he ran back toward the building. Jonas slowed as he reached the open doorway of the apartment building. The darkness inside seemed thicker than before, like fog that had settled into every corner of the lobby. For a moment, he hesitated on the threshold. The air inside smelled stale, like dust and wet stone. Behind him, the empty street remained silent. When he looked back, Marta was still standing under the street lamp, but she appeared even more faded now, her outline barely visible against the dim light. "Remember," she said softly, "don't answer if it knocks again." Jonas nodded and stepped inside. The lobby door shut behind him with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the building like a distant drum. The young landlord was still behind the desk, staring nervously at the stairwell door. His face lit with confusion when he saw Jonas return. "You left," the landlord said. "Why did you come back?" Jonas hurried to the desk. "There's something in this building," he said breathlessly. "Something in apartment 408. The landlord's face drained of color. "You've seen it," Jonas nodded. "And it's coming down the stairs." As if on cue, a faint dragging sound echoed from the stairwell again. "Drag, step, drag, step." The landlord stood up quickly. His chair scraped across the floor. "Then we don't have much time," he said. "It never comes this far unless it's ready." Jonas grabbed the edge of the desk. "Ready for what?" The landlord looked toward the stairwell door. "To replace someone." The dragging steps grew slightly louder. The landlord moved around the desk and grabbed a ring of old keys hanging on the wall. "If you want to stop it," he said quickly, "you have to reach the fourth floor before it does." Jonas stared at him. "You know about apartment 408? The landlord hesitated for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "The door didn't appear until the night Marta disappeared." Jonas felt a chill. "What happened that night?" The landlord swallowed. She heard knocking too. The stairwell door rattled slightly as something touched it from the other side. Drag, step, drag, step. Jonas backed away from the door. "Then we need to go," he said urgently. The landlord nodded. Together they rushed up the staircase. Their footsteps echoed loudly as they climbed. The stairwell lights flickered weakly above them. Jonas counted the floors as they passed them. First floor, second floor, third floor. When they reached the fourth floor landing, both men stopped. The hallway looked exactly like Jonas remembered. Long, narrow, silent. The ceiling light flickered slowly, casting uneven shadows across the walls. At the far end of the corridor, the door to apartment 408 was visible again. This time it stood fully open. Darkness spilled out of the doorway like thick smoke. Jonas felt a cold wind drifting from inside the room. "That wasn't open before," the landlord whispered. Jonas nodded slowly. "It wants us to come in." From somewhere below them came the dragging footsteps again. They were climbing the stairs now. Drag, step, drag, step. The landlord gripped the keys tightly. "We don't have time," he said. Jonas took a deep breath and started down the hallway toward apartment 408. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder the closer he got to the door. When he reached the entrance, he stopped. The inside of the apartment looked impossibly dark. No walls, no furniture, just a deep shadow stretching inward. "How big is that room?" Jonas whispered. The landlord shook his head slowly. "Bigger than the building." Jonas stepped inside. The darkness swallowed the hallway behind him almost immediately. The landlord followed, closing the door halfway as if hoping to keep whatever was coming out. For several seconds they both stood in silence. Then Jonas's phone flashlight flickered on. The beam revealed something strange. The apartment interior looked like a distorted copy of the building's hallway. Doors lined both sides of the space, stretching far into the darkness. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each door had a number on it. 101, 202, 305, 407. Jonas felt his stomach twist. "These are apartments," he said quietly. The landlord nodded slowly. "Every person who ever lived here." Jonas stepped closer to one of the doors. It was labeled 407, his apartment. He reached for the handle but stopped. Something moved behind him. Drag, step, drag, step. The sound echoed from the hallway outside the room. The thing wearing Jonas's face had reached the 4th floor. The landlord whispered urgently, "Find the original door." Jonas looked down the endless rows of doors. "Which one is that?" The landlord pointed deeper into the darkness. At the far end of the room stood a single door that looked older than the others. Its wood was cracked and blackened with age. The number on it was barely visible. 408. Jonas and the landlord began walking toward it. The deeper they went into the room, the quieter the world became. Even their footsteps seemed muffled now. Halfway down the corridor of doors, Jonas noticed something unsettling. Some of the doors were shaking slightly, as if something inside was trying to get out. Then he heard voices. Faint whispers leaking from behind the doors. Hundreds of voices speaking at once. Some cried for help. Some begged to be released. Others simply repeated the same words over and over. "Don't answer the knocking. Don't answer the knocking." Jonas quickened his pace. The door marked 408 grew larger ahead of them. Behind them, the hallway door creaked open. Drag, step, drag, step. The thing had entered the room. Jonas didn't dare turn around. The landlord grabbed his arm. "Hurry," he whispered. They reached the final door. Up close, it looked ancient. The wood was warped and covered in deep scratches. The handle was rusted and twisted like it had been melted. From the other side came a slow breathing sound. Jonas hesitated. "What's inside?" he asked. The landlord answered quietly, "Whatever started this." The dragging footsteps stopped somewhere behind them in the darkness. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then Jonas heard his own voice echo softly through the room. "Jonas." He turned slowly. Standing halfway down the corridor was the thing wearing his face. But it had changed. Its body looked taller now, its limbs slightly too long. The smile stretched wider than before, splitting the corners of its cheeks. Behind it stood dozens of other figures, copies of people from the building, all watching silently. The creature raised its hand slowly and knocked on one of the doors. 3 slow knocks echoed through the endless hallway. The door opened. Something inside reached out. Jonas turned back to the final door marked 408. His hand trembled as he grabbed the handle. Behind him, the creature spoke again, using his voice. "If you open that door, you stay forever." Jonas tightened his grip. Then he pulled the door open, and the darkness inside looked back at him.